Hello and welcome to the last lesson on Timothy Gordon's Case for Patriarchy. This will be a wrap up of the most important concepts from this fascinating book, and the author himself will be joining us later. So get your questions ready for Tim. And the most important message, I think, from this book is that fornication leads to emasculation, which is why the feminists promoted promiscuity so heavily. So that's the message we want to drill down on today and make sure you all fully understand it. Let's begin with our prayer as usual. Dr. Robillard, who's leading the prayer this week? Is it me or you? I can't remember.
It's me this week.
Okay, let's bring the prayer forward. Everybody at home, please do join us.
Come, Holy Spirit, divine creator, true source of light and fountain of wisdom, pour forth your brilliance upon my dense intellect, dissipate the darkness which covers me, that of sin and of ignorance. Grant me a penetrating mind to understand, a retentive memory, method and ease in learning, the lucidity to comprehend, and abundant grace in expressing myself. Guide the beginning of my work, direct its progress, and bring it to successful completion. This I ask through Jesus Christ, true God and true man, living and reigning with you and the Father, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen. I just want to point out something about this prayer that I think is really important, which is that it acknowledges that fallen man is marred in his intellect. Not totally, like the reformers said, we're not in total depravity, but one of the effects of original sin is that our intellects aren't what they should be. And
Right.
it's
Yep.
important for us to have humility about that. I think Islam acknowledges that there's a defect in man's knowledge, but it says that's all there is, and there's no problem with the will. If we just fix what we know, then
hmm
everything will be okay. But Christianity says no, both. So we've got problems with our intellect or our knowledge, and also our wills are wayward too.
Yes, both those things are dampened by sin, and yeah, sin makes you dumber,
Yeah,
and it doesn't just cloud our normal like memory or knowledge or capacity for attention. It literally clouds our capacity to apprehend truth, and yeah, that's I think a very important point that a lot of folks or the Western man is lost with respect to our sort of our present day epistemology.
yeah, for sure. And it makes sense of so many of the absurd positions that
It
secular
does,
philosophers
yes.
will maintain, like, for
Mhm.
example, Peter Singer and the idea that there's nothing really wrong with human beings and animals copulating.
Right.
Like,
Yeah, yeah. That's one of most famous philosopher in the world, pumped into the heads of every undergrad in the West. Somehow he's got all the right answers. And, you know, it's like, why is this guy front and center of every philosophy 101 course? I don't know. You have to wonder. That's it's just an interesting side effect.
that's it, madness. Uh, he should be saying that prayer daily
He
and
should. Yeah,
asking for illumination.
yeah.
So we'll kick off then, and hopefully Tim will be coming along later. People with questions in the chat, send them in anytime you like. What should be done about feminism? Here's what: weaponized chastity. In a nutshell, I think that is the message of Tim's book, that
hmm
we can't have a return to rightly ordered patriarchy unless we get back to rightly ordered male sexual desire. Promiscuity was weaponized. Now
hmm
we have to weaponize chastity in response.
Yep. Yeah. Makes a total sense. This is that Saladin quote about if you want to destroy a civilization, then just encourage the women to remove their tops or their garments. It's also in that Chesterton, as well as the Imago Jones quote about sexual liberation being political control or tyranny. And so to reverse that, chastity needs to be the antidote.
What do we mean by chastity, and why is it the remedy? What does it defend against?
Well, it defends against disordered lust and disordered procreative acts and fornication outside the bounds of marriage, which cause all sorts of direct and indirect ills with regard to social trust, disease, broken homes, etc. And if the family is the single cell of civilization, then now you've just driven a wedge, or you've just begin unbinding the glue that holds everything together. So I think that is the reason why lust and those appetites need to be properly ordered to, for the good of the individuals and for the good of the common good as well.
Yeah, that's it. If you break sex, then you break the family and you break society, which is why it was the exact area that pressure was applied.
Mhm.
You use the metaphor there of the glue that holds men and women together and binds them for families, and that's the foundation of society. So promiscuity is like a solvent in a way that
Mhm.
weakens this.
Yeah. Yep.
Right, Tim's just joining. Let me see if we can bring him in. So let's get. Here you go. Right.
Nice.
Okay, we got him. How you doing, Tim?
Oh, I'm so good, man. How are you, brother? How are you, Will? How
Yeah,
are you, man?
great. We're just reminding people of the most important concept, to our minds anyway, in your book, which is the one I've been recommending to anybody who asks for a good overview of patriarchy and Catholicism. Weaponized chastity, and why it's the only adequate, the only appropriate response to the fact that promiscuity was weaponized. And Mike's just been saying how the family as the original social cell was the main thing attacked by promiscuity. And to defend against that attack, we need chastity.
Absolutely. Chastity is the way to opt into the family. And if you think this is an overstatement, then consider Aristotelian habit formation. Like what the feminists inculcated in society. Feminist doesn't mean females. We think of females most often. It means females or males that believe in the sexual revolution, that men and women are the same, and therefore women can be quote unquote used. They inculcated the idea in society that you have your fun when you're young. You use contraception while you're having fun, and having fun just means fornicate. It's disgusting. You spurn chastity, and then you eventually get married, and you have like one kid, still using contraception to ensure that you only have one kid. And men and women are equals. They'll never say how decision making happens, because you can't even vote. It's a 1-1 tie. It's not even like the Mormons, I guess, if they were feminists, they had multiple wives, they could have a vote. But 1-1, it's a tie. And so what I'm saying about Aristotelian habituation is this narrative doesn't even make sense on its own terms. Habit being what it is. They say you develop this habit for polyamory in your youth, and then all of a sudden you stop after, you're 35, so you've had 15 or 16 adult years of this with these habits, and all of a sudden you just stop. They say this is better than getting married when you're 20 before you formed the bad habit of going around and fornicating with a bunch of people. It's asinine. So the way to undo that is, yes, chastity, but getting married young, marrying soon, where it's easy for two 20-year-olds to find each other and still both be virgins. Yeah, I mean, I know kids are getting started at 11, 12, 13 now. It's horrifying, but it's much easier at 20 than at 45.
Yeah, for sure. You can't be stressed enough that chastity is the same virtue before as after marriage. And you're not going to pull it out of thin air if you spent the last 10, 15 years developing the vice of unchastity. Mike, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that's spot on, and it's also, I think, far more damaging too when those set of vicious habits for individuals is extended writ large over an entire culture. It's not merely that, oh, then we'll just have a bunch of individuals that are have these vices and have one kid later on in their lives. It's really, you run that over a long enough iterations, like civilization collapses. Right? It's not like, oh, it's just a bad, it's just this like suboptimal side effect that it's like, no, like everything falls apart.
Yeah, which I've titled this video somewhat controversially, "How the Red Pill Fists Men," and they say that the red pill is about being a praxeology, is about what works, but it doesn't work. The ghetto communities have run the experiment further along the line than anybody else has, and what you get is the most extreme form of family breakdown and emasculation of men, because the family is where you get the male authority. It's where you get the dignity of the provider role. If we break that down with promiscuity, then instead it's the state that has to step in, the welfare state, and
Right.
emasculate men further. So I think that's really well put, Mike, and it's not hyperbole. J.D. Unwin, secular liberal scholar, surveyed 80 societies in his 1934 masterpiece, Sex and Culture, hoping to prove that there was no connection at all between sexual morality and cultural attainment. And the guy found the opposite of what he was expecting and had the integrity to write it up and admit it and say, I was wrong. Prenuptial chastity is the most important factor in cultural advancement. We're finding it out the hard way, aren't we?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, the family's destroyed. The family is destroyed, and people point at divorce rates, which are partly exaggerated. They're not quite 50% if we're considering, divorce of among first-time marrieds. It drops a bit, but that's not the best way to prove that the family is destroyed. The best way to prove that the family is destroyed is to look around and to say, how many people did you know growing up in the 90s that the father ran the family and truly ran the family in a virtuous way, where he's the priest of the household? He didn't say any bullshit like happy wife, happy life. He was in charge. The mother loved the father and respected the father, and the father's word went, but he was lovely, he was playful, he was great to the wife and the kids, and he took him to church, he played with them, he prayed with them. I don't really know anyone like that in the 80s. That's how I know the family's broken. It's a lot higher in number than the fake, exaggerated 50% divorce rate. It's like 98% of households fail, maybe 99, to have a father like that. I knew like 2 kids like that. They're like, well, yeah, my dad was nice, but he wasn't the one to take us to church. Why? Because the idea among the baby boomers of being priest of the household, which is John Paul II's term, the priest of the ecclesiola, the church in miniature, is the father. And it was like, no, my dad did a lot of those things, but he tended to, if I talk to people and they're trying to be positive, they'll say, oh, he was good. He's a good provider. Yeah, I know. That was a boomer thing. He's a good provider, and he was nice, and he didn't hit us. Okay, I know. And he taught me a sport. Okay, it was a boomer thing. Who taught you to church? Who dragged your ass to church on Sunday morning? It was my mom. I know it was. Who made the tough decisions in the household if push came to shove? That was my mom. I know. So that's the spoliation of the Western family, not the divorce rate necessarily.
Yeah, I think that explains, or you just described exactly the milieu that I grew up in the 80s in New England as well. And it was all the men deep down, the first idol that they bent the knee to was feminism, or more broadly, just sex egalitarianism, and then to Christ, then to Catholicism. At the end of the day, when you watched, the things that they were embarrassed about, the things they were ashamed about, the things they were proud about, it wasn't patriarchal Catholicism. It was sex egalitarianism. That was really the first thing that they bent the knee to, and they were ashamed of anything that sounded like there was hierarchy or sex
That's
hierarchy.
a good point. That's such a good point. If you want to know where someone's heart lies, where's their shame, where's their where's their pride. That's such a good point, Mike.
On that note of rightly ordered hierarchy, what I hear you guys saying there with the descriptions of those families where hierarchy isn't rightly ordered is that unless the father first follows God, then he can't lead his family. So that's the root disorder, the father not fulfilling his duties under natural law as the priest of the household. You get that wrong, and then everything else goes wrong after it.
Absolutely. I mean, we've lost entirely the concept of what hierarchy is. Hierarchy goes God to man to wife to kids, and we reject hierarchy. And trad Catholics talk about this a lot. It's like shooting fish in a barrel, but they don't understand the implications. Veiling. If you look at the biblical chapters on veiling in St. Paul's epistles, there are 3 of them. And specifically, it's odd. It's not only sinful for a woman not to veil in Mass, it's sinful. He feels need to cover, St. Paul, that it would be sinful for a man to veil. Why? Because of the deeply profound typology that of headship. A man does not cover his head because he is the head. He can't cover his headship. This is the equivalent ontologically of what Adam did by covering his headship and letting Eve make decisions that were his. All humanity has to suffer sickness and sin and death because Adam did that. So a man covering his head, St. Paul says in Timothy, is actually a sin, whereas a woman not covering her head is a sin. What this means is the man is the head of woman. Christ is the head of man. Why do you think God goes through this sequential, through his written word via St. Paul, this sequential hierarchy? It's very direct. And instead, today, most Catholics have been lied to about Ephesians chapter 5. Ephesians chapter 5, which says all women must submit to men. This is sex egalitarian. What? Sex egalitarianism? What? It's nuts. So they lie to you, even as they show you some of the proof texts that countervail against their lie.
The way in which I think this really manifests most obviously in the average guy's daily life now is in courtship. And I loved your point in the book about how the non-virtuous male, through his breach of chastity, will end up emasculated. Let's talk a bit more about how, even if we're not Catholic, as some people watching this aren't, you're just a average secular bro and you're trying to meet a girl, but you're really keen on fornicating. You've been told that sex before marriage is what a real alpha does. You're saying, Tim, that that's going to end up not by making you more masculine, but it's going to end up with you being emasculated. And the image you use in the book is of the woman becoming the goalie and the man as the supplicant, begging for her sexual attention. This is topsy-turvy right from the start, yeah?
Absolutely. I mean, sorry to say it this way, but if a man has one sexual partner before his wife, then he's half the man he could be for. If he has 2 before his wife, he's a third of the man. If he has 3, he's a quarter of the man. I know it's not popular because we're talking to people that have largely fallen into this attractive nuisance type pitfall, but you could get it back, same as women can get it back. But what's fucked up about the red pill community, and I'm not a sex egalitarian, by the way, I shouldn't have to say this, but what's fucked up about the red pill community is without any cover of the explanatory gap, I'll say, yeah, that's a low value woman, a woman that sleeps around. But a man that sleeps around, that's just a man. That can be a regular high value man. Or they'll say that in sleeping around, a man's high value is reconstituted.
Right. Yes. Yeah. It goes up as evidenced by how successful, how good he is at betting women. Yeah. That's the philosophy. Yeah.
Yeah, like Tate. I read a quote by Tate the other day that said, "A good woman knows that only a beta gives her loyalty back. She gives him loyalty like one of his coven or whatever flock of women, troop of women, gaggle of women. But she knows that if he's an alpha, he doesn't give her loyalty. This is so anti-Christian and such a product of feminism that it makes you want to spit. It's so ridiculous. Yes, it might be a more natural vice for men to fall into, fornication, than women. No question here. It might signify more disorder in the upbringing or the family of origin of a young woman who acts slutty than a young man who acts slutty. You got no argument from me there. But we're both called to chastity. It is not a sex specific virtue. So there can be a cultural, a psychological, or a sociological disorder that is shown more fully, that is expressed more fully by women committing the sin of fornication than men. But that doesn't mean it's a worse sin, or that it's not a sin, that is a virtue for men and a vice for women. That's just silly Twitter level superficiality that coextends with every single red-pilled platitude I've ever read or seen. It's ridiculous. It's intellectually impoverished.
So what's the problem then with a guy who wants to buy a Gumroad course telling him how to become the ultimate alpha, and that this involves bedding many women before marriage? He's going to feel really successful and like he's achieved all his wildest dreams in life. But your message to him is, no, this deep down is emasculation, despite the messaging you're getting.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's altogether wrong for a young man to want to test his mettle and just go around and see, how many wins of the Brooklyn Nets have got 12 wins in a row now. That's cool. Win streaks are cool. How many beautiful women can a young man see at a somewhat random sets of scenarios and go up and ask them, try to hit on them, ask them for a date? You're not, I know this isn't the traditional method of courtship, but since we're talking to the secular bros, there's nothing wrong with that. To test your mettle and see what you are on the marketplace. It is a kind of marketplace. It doesn't have to be sleazy. To just say, hey, how many, I got 8 random, attractive, really good looking girls' numbers and got a date out of it in a row. That's the version of the modern world that I think accords with nature, accords with male behavior on the date. It has to be just about epistemology. It has to be about knowledge gathering. Is this girl a good fit for me? The behavior on the date is what accords with being virtuous or being vicious. Don't be a horn dog on the date. But yeah, it's perfectly cool. It's perfectly natural, and I would say even virtuous, for a young man to be like, hey, I do want these girls to think I'm cool. I want them to think I'm cool, meaning I will try to get their number. They might think I'm kind of a normal guy, but then I'll show them on the date. I'm not trying to hook up with them. I'm trying to get to know them. So it's a mixture of the old and the new that I think is the way forward.
Thoughts on that, Mike? I think that's smart. That's a good way to approach it.
Yeah. I think that's I mean, I don't know. Hindsight's 2020. That's advice I wish somebody had properly told me a while ago. Before I sort of fell deep into the red pill thinking. And the red pill response to that is it's coming from a lot of dudes who have been hurt, so their overly defensiveness is going to be like, well, it's not even worth it, bro. Right? She's just going to like move on to another guy. So the only thing left, right? The only thing left is to just perpetually skim along the surface of hookup culture and to not go for anything meaningful or virtuous or in depth. And I think it's generated from a variety of reasons. One, the meme culture where people just copying Tate and company and dudes like that. The second is the flawed metaphysics of man that Will and I have talked about at length, where it's just like, oh, we're all just evolutionarily determined, meat machine animals anyways. Bonobos act this way, therefore we can. And then third, like I said, it's some sort of personal heartache or heartbreak or pain that a lot of these guys are trying to avoid. And that I think sometimes manifests itself in these sort of hopscotching along shallow relationships as opposed to potentially being heartbroken again. And I think that's sort of the set of motivations, if I could sum it up in that space.
Yeah.
What's the response then to a guy who describes himself as being red-pilled about female nature, as they put it, but in reality, what this comes across as is being totally black-pilled about marriage and the mere possibility of a successful relationship. And then he just shrugs his shoulders and says, well, hell, if everything's just going to shit, why not fornicate?
So yeah, I think that's where things head. But as we've talked about too at length, it's like this, at some point this does become intellectually dishonest, where these same people that help themselves one moment to some version of evolutionary determinism in order to wallow in despair or to give license to fornicate. If you say something or cross them or somebody crosses them and they don't like it, suddenly that's unfair. Suddenly, what about my rights? Suddenly, you have agency and I have agency, and this is dishonorable. And right, so now agency bubbles back into the picture. Morality and fairness does. So I think if people are intellectually honest about that, you can't subscribe to both of those positions at the same time. And if one does find something dishonorable or unfair, or they do point to like, oh, wait a second, like that's on account of somebody else's agency. It's like, well, okay, yeah, well, you have agency too, and other people have agency, and that, now we can start clawing our way out of this evolutionary determinist model, and that I think at least puts people back on the right track.
Agreed. I think Tim's book is like a sledgehammer to the skull of these people, because they want to say feminism is wrong. Like they'll talk as if there's no such thing as objective morality, but they do want to say feminism's wrong. Now,
yes, yeah, it's so wrong. It's so unjust. Why?
Yeah.
It's I thought these are just patterns being run. Where's justice in that ontology at all?
Yeah, and Tim's book says really clearly the way you are behaving is what feminism is all about. So don't say it's wrong on the one hand and then do it on the other hand.
And furthermore, don't think you're owning the feminists by fornicating like crazy and collapsing the family structure. It's
right.
Like it's like the trans people chopping off their genitals, thinking that they're owning their opposition. It's like, yeah, it's well done. You really owned us.
You got him so good. Like the trans guy's like, he chops off his pee-pee. He's like, I stuck it to the man. It's like, you stuck it to your little man. And it's like a red pill guy. Like, yeah, I betted all these chicks, like 100 last year. And, yeah, granted 10 of them then bore my children. And I got them so good that they probably aborted my sons or daughters. It's like, yeah, you got them good. What the fuck are you talking about?
Yeah, and then, oh, excuse me, the nanny state's at your door, and we're going to arrest you now because you said the wrong pronouns. And you're like, oh, wait a second. I wish I had a defense against that.
Yeah.
Right.
Like,
this is fornication, people forget, is fundamentally a violation of the rights of the child to be brought up in the stable union of marriage. And Tim's point there about the tragic reality of abortion in this, most guys like to push that aside and pretend that because they don't know about it, it's not happening, but it is.
It is.
Yes.
And yeah.
No, sorry, Mike. I wasn't trying to. He was talking to you. Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, it is, and I think it is something like how you just phrased it, Will, is correct. Yeah, they want to sweep it under the carpet and pretend it's not happening, because to look at that horror head on means making some really, really radical changes to one's life, and also admitting probably a lot of past ethical failings.
For sure. Tim, anything to add to that?
I think I was watching. I think because I wasn't. None of us. There were. I always knew abortion was wrong. I knew it from kindergarten on when I learned there was such an awful, odious thing in the world. And the church isn't that weak on abortion. It's weak, but it's not that weak. But the church is really weak is on decrying contraception. And I really wasn't taught it was wrong, even though I was taught abortion was wrong. And so I think I was in high school watching a Seinfeld episode where Jerry asks Kramer, like, hey, have you ever like snuck any past the goalie? They're talking about having sex with women. And, impregnate, what he means by snuck one past the goalie is impregnating a woman through whatever form of contraception you're using. And Kramer says, I haven't. And he was surprised he hadn't. And so he was worried about his fertility. He was expecting that he had. And then he asked Jerry, he goes, oh, that's coming with me to the grave. I'm like, wait, what are you guys talking about? You think, so both of you are saying you think you have little Jerry or little Kramers running around out there? And that's not what they meant. They meant, well, the women take care of it. They take care of it. That they're assuming that when contraception fails, you're using abortion. And I know you've heard that from pro-life people before, but it set on me. That was when I really got it about contraception. I think I might have been in college, where it's like contraception and abortion do go together like a wink and a nod. And abortion and contraception are the two primary means by which feminism propagates itself in the sex revolution.
Yeah, exactly right. This is related to the next concept we're looking at about what teachings the faith is ashamed of. But before we get onto that, we've got an interesting question from Sven. What is the best way to prepare to marry young? Well, I guess we can kick an answer off by saying chastity, because it's the same virtue before and after marriage. If you're not training yourself in that virtue, then you're not going to have much chance of a successful marriage. Premarital promiscuity doubles the risk of divorce. So we got to get that rightly ordered. But what else?
Well, we dealt with this in our show, or a CMASC show, a couple of weeks ago, Will. I think there's an upward pressure and a downward pressure that inform when the age at which we should have young men and women start to date each other. And the upward pressure is like, well, the downward pressure is we don't want it to be too early, right? Because then, let them be uncorrupted, non-sexual actors. You're not even just having sex, but not even thinking about the opposite sex as long as is possible. The upward pressure is that we want them to get married young. And if you just start dating when you're 21 or something, some trads push it way far back, then it's going to 80% of a woman's eggs are gone by 21 or 22. So I think locating the correct time to date, and this is a prudential call, it can vary by temperament, but I think somewhere around 17 is where I come out. Like if you start dating there are Thomistic manuals on this. Parents are not allowed to deny a vocation. It's a sin. So if your young man says, I want to be a priest, you're not allowed to get in his way. What the main thing that got me in trouble when I was a high school teacher in a politically conservative enclave of California was not for saying stuff about homos. It was not for saying stuff about Islam. It was not for saying stuff about the trannies, because it was politically conservative. It was politically conservative, but theologically idiotic, liberal, uninformed. And it was when I was like, you guys should be getting married, your first, second year of college age, undergrad college age. Parents went apeshit. They didn't like that. So I'm like, and I would say further to that, I'd say a lot of these people went away to college, contacted me, and they're like, my parents don't really want me getting a serious girlfriend freshman or sophomore year of college. I'm like, that's really messed up. That's really messed up. That is a vocation, and they're blocking it. It's a sin for a parent to block a vocation, or to try to. Same as it's a sin for a parent to try to block your young man who wants to become a priest. So the point is, you can't date so young that you can't do anything about it. In our culture, I would agree, you shouldn't be getting married at 15. That's just culturally, that's not what folks do anymore. They're not prepared because of not absolute conditions, but cultural conditions. But whatever, maybe 18's old enough to get married. And so if you start dating and you say, okay, you need a little time before that, you want people to be able to get married if they meet the right one at the earliest possible moment, which I would say is 18 is a rule of thumb. So that means, let them date at 17. But the Thomistic manuals say don't let any kids date unless they acknowledge it's got a teleology, it's for marriage.
Yeah, and that they can marry soon, because realistically, the temptation to fornication is going to be too much to cope with if it's protracted over years and years. So that's why the whole thing needs to be compressed. I thought I had listening to that, Tim, about the parents trying to block the dating. Isn't it funny how, I mean, Mike likes pointing out these contradictions. On the one hand, you get all these appeals to what evolution says is natural. But when you get the fact that peak fertility begins for women at around age 16 and then runs over until around 25. So 16, 17, 18, that's when the body is basically getting primed for marriage and family. And yet in that same window, the people who will say it's natural to fornicate, whatever, will say, no, we can't have any pregnancies at this point.
Totally. That's why I felt a little silly making the point I just made, saying 15, 16 is even too early, because culturally it feels like a bridge too far. But my statistics in the book, or maybe they're in Steph's book, I forget, because she wrote a book on this too, they show a little younger. Peak fertility is not, it's more like 15, 16 through 21, 22. By 25, most of the woman's eggs are gone, dead, never get them back. So even, there's different figures for this that will inform some natural variants, but it's young.
Yeah.
It's young, which is why, the Virgin Mary was 14, 15, right? And fertility begins at a peak, and then it just declines from there. So yeah, human beings are not meant to be getting married at 26, 27 years old. That's way too late. And then, of course, that's the primary, the principle behind it is just follow teleology. We have a design. The important secondary ramification is that if people are marrying late, they'll have all these sexual partners, because on the average, folks are not going to be chaste.
Right. One of the reasons for marriage is to combat fornication, because we know what the reality of fallen human nature is, and we're not expecting people to be heroic in their virtue. We have to be realistic about it. Before we get on to why the faith is ashamed of these particular teachings regarding patriarchy, I thought Oliver's question is an important one. For single guys in their 30s who have lived a life of secularism and promiscuity, but are now committed to chastity, Catholicism, purity, is it possible to undo the damage and be worthy of a young, pure wife?
This came up with a young friend of mine over the New Year's holiday. It depends what you mean by pure. And again, in an ideal world, men and women marry young. They're both virgins. It's beautiful. It happens like 1 in 500 or something now. If you look at what both the men and the women are virgins, technically a virgin only deserves a virgin. So there's an answer to the question, Oliver, that I'm like, let me read it out loud. For single guys in the 30s who have lived a life of secularism and promiscuity, but now committed to chastity, Catholicism, and purity, is it possible to undo the damage and be worthy of a young, pure wife? Well, if you're committed to chastity, Catholicism, and purity now, Oliver, that means going forward, right? It means you're forward looking. And yes, you can commit yourself from this day forward, Oliver, to chastity, Catholicism, and purity. 100%. But backward looking, no, you'd have to have a DeLorean with a flux capacitor to do that. right? You can't be committed to backward looking purity if you're not a virgin. You're not different than females. So, I mean, sorry, it might not be the answer you're looking for, but forward looking chastity, Catholicism, purity, yes, good. You ought to be looking for a woman that matches you, right? That's justice. That's, you hopefully you or any men like you were not a total mutt just running around town like a total rounder. I mean, might have made some mistakes. Maybe you had sex with a few different girlfriends throughout the 20s. It's reasonable to expect you're going to find someone like that, a young woman that now has realized around a coextensive time period in their life that secularism is false and has now rededicated themselves to chastity, Catholicism, and purity. So forward looking, yes, but no, you shouldn't expect to find a virgin wife. No, virgins should be for virgins. You ought to expect to find someone you don't want a girl that's, and if you find one, good for you, but it's a little bit of an unfair deal. If she should, a young virgin should look for a young man, maybe a little older than her, that's also a virgin in an ideal world. Sorry, guys. Sorry to. This is the way justice works. But by the way, forward looking is the way you should be. I mean, virginity is beautiful. Like some relativists would call it, oh, that's the ideal, but it's not really wrong to fornicate. No, it's really wrong to fornicate. But once you've fucked up, you can't. What, are you going to go kill yourself? There are no DeLoreans that with flux capacitors. You can't go back in the past. You can't undo the past. Go read Great Gatsby. And you shouldn't feel horrible about yourself either. Now just be like, I get it now. I wasn't Catholic then. I went to confession. It's wiped clean ontologically, so I can't, if you're a Catholic, can't be judged for it. But yeah, realistically, I still have to acknowledge I'm not a virgin. I'm looking for someone that was roughly around my coextensive amount of sin in this area and is forward-looking, committed to chastity, Catholicism, and purity. I think there's a lot of really fucking weird cognitive dissonance with the red pill guys have created. Like, it's more of the Andrew Tate stuff. Like, well, yeah, a high value man has had sex with 2,000. You should get virgins. Virgins don't want to be with the dude that's been with lots of women. Just as men don't want to be with a virgin that's been a woman that's been with lots of men.
You stole my thunder, Tim. I was going to say that the exception is if you're a kickboxing webcam pornographer in Eastern Europe, then that bails out of his society and converts to Islam. Then I suppose that's the escape clause, right?
That's true. That's the exception. God, thus spake Jesus, or thus spake the prophet when he came down. He's like, unless you run like a softcore porn warehouse in like the mountains of Northern Europe or whatever, then it's okay.
This is a good point to mention my current project of everyone say a prayer for Tate, because I'm worried that having talked about harem so much, if he goes to jail, he might end up in someone else's harem.
Yeah, we should pray that he doesn't. That would be right.
Yeah, exactly. So we are at this point then where we've got some really important teachings that for some reason the church is ashamed of stating openly. And Tim says how some of the verses in Ephesians 5 are bracketed as optional. What do you think the reason for this shame is, Tim? And if we are ashamed of them, is there a sense in which we shouldn't be surprised that they're getting trashed?
Because John Paul II, you'll never hear me call him John Paul the Great. I don't understand. We call them the J2P2s, like robots that worship John Paul II. Look, he hated communism. That's good. He had like the second longest pontificate. He did some good, but he kissed the Quran at Assisi in 1986. That's weird. He called Vatican II the second Pentecost, which is creepy. Means the rebirth date of the Holy Spirit. He claimed he wanted to reify a Christian feminism. And he confused a lot of young men and women under the auspices of he's a faithful right-wing pope. That you can be, that's funny. That's funny. That you can be a faithful Catholic and be a Christian feminist. So I really am not I'm not a J2P2. That's the main thing you saw in the 80s, 90s, early 2000 church going forward was Franciscan University at Steubenville types that are like, look, I'm faithful. I'm not a left Cath. I'm not a lib Cath, but I'm a Catholic feminist. No, that doesn't work. You have to, a young woman has to submit to her husband. She should get a Aragorn king type husband that smiles at her and loves her and treats her like a queen. But yet you absolutely have to be a submissive wife to your husband. That's why get a good one. Get one you really like.
Mike, have you noticed this particular teachings that the church is ashamed of?
Yeah, yeah. I was saying this offline. I was in a Christmas mass at a Novus Ordo, and as the little old lady that does the announcements afterwards gets up there, and she goes, "I'd like to, I'd like to finish Father Smith's homily," and she's like that. That was her phrasing. It wasn't, "Oh, I'm so," and then she talked for 90 seconds about like how much she loved her grandkids and and it's like, okay, fine, time and a place. And afterwards the priest just said, gosh, who runs things around here? And everybody nervously laughed, and then it ended. And it occurred to me that that church, that parish, as well as the parish that I grew up in, would have been ashamed had the priest asserted his authority, had anybody offline probably said that was inappropriate. That any shred of patriarchal authority or priestly authority in that context to assert itself would not be tolerated. I think if I went to my parish now and said I'm not comfortable with the female altar girls and the collection baskets being held by women, I think people go, that's we're I think I would get a lot of hostile attention from something like that. So I think, yeah, any shred of patriarchy assertion is going to be looked at with some degree of shame.
It's also strictly forbidden by the manuals, and it's a deep grave matter for a woman to finish the homily. It's anathematized several times in Holy Scripture and by the manuals. She's not. That's a. Yeah, everyone was scandalized by that at your parish,
Yep.
Mike.
Yeah, it wasn't mine. It was when I was visiting somebody. But yeah.
Oh yeah.
Well, if you're ashamed of the authority, then don't be surprised when you're no longer able to wield it. And this comes back to Tim's point about reclaiming it in the family, first of all. And he says that a man's primary vocational duty, instruction in the virtues, begins at the end of the workday rather than at the beginning. This is a very countercultural thought, and one that most guys never really consider, that their real job begins after their working day. So many people attach their identity and their worth as a man to what they do working for someone else in an office. Racking up the numbers in your bank account, that's the measure of what a great man you are now, isn't it? It's not something you do when you get home. When you get home, you watch some sports, you get drunk, you go to sleep, and you get ready for the next day.
Yeah, it's pathetic. We gave it away. Like, I always walk a tightrope when I point this out. Feminism is a male sin. Now, the reason it's a tightrope is because the first rule of the feminists is never, ever, for any reason, at any time, blame a woman for anything. Well, women in our day are, on the average, are awful. They're out of control, shrieking harpies, that are
Amen.
Attacking their husbands, attacking men at every turn, hitting them and being surprised that at the response. It's out of control. So I do not commit this grave sin. But the remember, for Christians, not just Catholics, the original sin was feminism, and it's a two-part sin. It's a sin of any act of commandeering the function of another person, the role of another person, or their office, is two part. There's a sin of commission and a sin of omission. And I talk about Adam and Eve. Eve had the actual active part of the sin. St. John Chrysostom says that. St. Jerome says that. All of the patristics that write on it say it was Eve's sin of commission. But it was, and that without slipping into the cardinal sin of feminism or the cardinal rule of feminism, it was first an act of omission on the part of the male who allowed himself to be cucked, who allowed his sacred duty and his sacred honor to be commandeered by his wife. And that's what's at work here. Repeat the specific call to question again. Ask specifically.
So we're talking about how too many men now see their work, paid work in the office, as the measure of their manhood, and have forgotten that their true work starts after the working day is done and they get home.
Yeah. So the second half of that is that men have been transformed, even as their wives largely have become co-workers, which the Catholic tradition always anathematized. They're still, everyone understands the main breadwinners, but they've had their most sacred duty as the priest of the ecclesiola taken away. So they're neither praying with nor playing with their kids. So they get home, and instead of moral instruction, like a priest tends to his flock, they have dinner. They're kind of like blah. There's a sitcom-ish quality to the way that most, I think, American Western civilizational dinner table conversations work on a weekday. Probably far too much stuff crammed into the weekday, the work week. And they basically ignore all the duties and then get drunk. And it's really a shame, because if you view, hey, I already did what I had to do today. Breadwinning is a function of a man. It's his lowest function. It's to pray with, to play with, to support spiritually, particularly when you have teenagers. They have complex emotional issues they need dealt with. If you say, oh, that stuff's not that important, or that's not my main job, my main job is putting food on the table, then you feel way less pressure to be like, look, I gotta, like Theoden says to Merry when he wants to go to battle with him, King Theoden, he's like, look, my riders have a 3-day ride ahead of them, and they have to have strength enough to fight when they get there. That's what men ought to be doing when they go to work. I have an 8 or 9 hour workday. I need to set aside a reserve of strength for my most important vocational tasks, which is having energy to be somewhat cheery. You don't have to be weekend or summer vacation cheery, but somewhat cheery, somewhat enthusiastic enough to deal with the problems of my teens, to be a little romantic to my wife, to say some prayers without just slurring them out half drunk at the dinner table. And like what I knew, and what a lot of my friends knew, is like, if I had problems that I needed a father for, I'm not talking about my dad, but it was just a common sort of sitcomish reality in the 90s. You have teenish problems. Boomers really seem to regard teens as, oh, that's stupid. That's a stupid problem to have. Look, we got to get to bed early. We got a work day. I already did my job today. I just want to relax. That's a very sitcom 90s approach, and it's wrong. Teens need you to do your duty as a kind of confessor and priest. Particularly young male teens need a father there they can talk to. And you're already feeling off the hook if you think you did all of your job. Instead, you did the least important part of your job for 8 hours at work. Now you got to come home with strength to fight.
I think it's really well put, Tim. I think that two thoughts come to mind. One is, I think you're spot on in the book, pointing to the Protestant, the elevation of the Protestant work ethic being one of the symptoms, or one of the causes of this symptom. Pulling people away from the sacraments and vocation, and heightening work to a disordered level. And then two is, it just reminded me of the Seamask episode we just had, is that like maybe some type of return to some less consumerist, more living off the land way of being in the world could actually like bridge this gap, where it's not fathers are going off and grinding away at work and then there's family life, but there's there's a harmonious integration of, you take your son to hunt or garden or do, do the your work and your vocation start intertwining with one another. They're not radically partitioned.
Well, Tim makes this great point about attempting to funnel grace not from the sacraments, but rather from labor. So it's almost an idolatry of work, isn't it? And when you said there that it's the lowest function of a man to provide materially for his family, it's sad that that has now become the measure of a man, because it means that the whole concept of manhood has been constricted and it's fallen to that. And you expect to get a pat on the back for what really should just be you getting started on your duties.
Yeah, there's this great quote I found in the book. That's a great tweet about, I think it's by a Protestant called Baxter, that talks about labor and its conversionary process of wealth. It can, labor converts natural resources into wealth at some level. And Baxter says, wealth is fine, but it should be worn about the shoulders like a light cloak. It shouldn't become an iron cage. And largely on the basis of the Puritan work ethic, Catholics got influenced that way, and they seem to wealth, and even not extravagant wealth, but even just security, paying the bills, putting food on the table, are all euphemisms for wealth. And a lot of folks in the suburbs in America, anyway, well, you could say how it is there in England, but they're like, well, we don't have extravagant wealth, but we have exigent needs, food on the table. And, that's why your father goes to work, doesn't really tend to your moral education, doesn't really tend to the sacraments, isn't the one dragging you to church on Sunday, isn't the one saying, hey, when's the last time you've been to confession, isn't the one saying, hey, teen son, I know you're horny all the time, but you can't look at pornography. I know this is the reality. Young, 15-year-old dudes are pretty horny, but you can't look at porn. Instead, what you could do is think of how much better it is for a young man who's 15 if the dad just says, look, dude, I know you're crazy for girls right now, but instead of being like, well, you're going to get married when you're 30, which is like a world away, you should be looking to get married when you're 20. So can you wait 5 years? That's a lot more reasonable. And yeah, you can start dating with girls and flirting with girls when you're 17, 18. Maybe you get married when you're 19. But what the secularists have done, because the men don't give counsel, they come home, they just kind of commiserate. They're like, oh, John's been in the bathroom a long time. He's probably, they have this, oh, Johnny approach to pornography that the media has inculcated. Oh, he's probably abusing himself in the restroom. That's just what I did. And he'll do that in combination with fornicating for the next 15 years. Then eventually he'll settle down and he'll be a cucked, breadwinner too. So it's a very vicious cycle. Instead of being like, just stay strong, stay virtuous, say this prayer, teach him about Saint Joseph, who's our greatest exemplar for chastity. And look, you don't have to be like Saint Joseph. You can get yourself a wife that is not a virgin, and just wait a few years and tell them why that's important, and tell them why you can get a 10. You should be looking for a 9 or a 10 that is also a virgin. You want to be pure for each other. That's the kind of counsel men need to be giving to their teens. It's actually much more work than a newborn baby. And men just don't want to do that because they become pathetic.
Yep, powerful words. I think there's a dereliction of duty that many people will recognize there. The instruction in the virtues as the main duty of a man is a point that I think we need to emphasize continually. Now, the other point was the way in which we regard the family. You say that in the anti-feminist society, the home and family must be regarded as both natural and supernatural. This is related to instruction in the virtues, but we're going beyond just the cardinal virtues here. Say a bit more about what you mean by seeing the family as supernatural.
Well, this is an issue that I don't want to get dragged into anecdotes, but this is an issue that would always be broached by those parents of high school kids that would get mad at me for saying, get married young, try to be a virgin, try to find a virgin, and then you have this outlet for your attraction. They would often, the parents would often look at me cross-eyed, and they'd say, well, look, I'm not telling them not to have a boyfriend or girlfriend. This is also why college is so bad. This is why you shouldn't go to college if you want to meet someone really good. And like me and Mike say in our book, don't go to college. You get a girlfriend or boyfriend when you're a freshman in college, you're 19, and you tell someone who's 19, even if they're reasonably virtuous, yeah, just wait. The big argument becomes, even with nominally Christian people, is just wait till you graduate college. I don't understand that. College is a great time, undergraduate, to get married. Nothing's really expected of you. You can both just, if you met at your college, you can be in college together and married. Then you can, you know, it will be cheaper on both of your parents, who are willing to support you anyway through undergrad in most cases. You can shack up, and it's not a sin. And you can have sex with each other, and it's virtuous. What I mean by the family is supernatural is that literally, for a Catholic or an Orthodox person, every time you do the formal act that corresponds with one of the 7 sacraments, you get extra grace. Every time you go to confession, you get extra grace. And grace is like magic. It makes life easier. It makes doing the right thing easier. Every time you go to confession, you get a little bit more grace. Every time you go to communion, you get a little bit more efficacious grace. Well, in marriage, every time you commit the marital act, which is sex, your marriage gets a little bit stronger cumulatively. So parents would ask me, Catholics who are kind of know-nothing parents would say, well, why not just tell my son or daughter? I had them get mad at me for telling them, hey, get married. If you got a good girlfriend or boyfriend, lock them down. If you meet freshman year of college, you should be married by sophomore year of college. This is an epistemic process. You're information gathering. You know if it's a good girl. Lock her down, man. Instead, they're going on internships in different parts of the country. Some other guy, if he's smart, is going to try to get your girlfriend from you if she's a real good catch. Lock her down, you know? Instead, the parents are like, well, why do that? Because even if your relationship manages to survive 3-4 years, which is a long time, an unnatural time for people to be abstaining from sex when they're really attracted to each other, which is normal and good to be that attracted to each other. Even if it survives that long, by the first year out of college, if you did it the Catholic way or the Christian way, then you would have had sex all those times. You'd have all those extra graces working in favor of your relationship. Even best case scenario, if you wait 4 years to get married, you'll be starting to accumulate those graces 4 years late. You'll have that much less grace in the marriage. That's what I mean by it's supernatural. You actually get what secularists would think are the equivalent of magic powers by being married and doing marriage half right, going to confession, going to church, and having sex with each other for 4 years. It makes you stronger.
There's a great explanation. Mike, what are your thoughts on that one?
This is reminding me of the opening quote that we were talking about, how sin clouds the intellect and makes you dumber, and the reverse version of that, so grace also it illuminates, and it makes you closer to the good, the true, and the beautiful. So yeah, I think that's just what came to mind when I heard Tim say that.
Yeah, stronger intellect and less prone to evil, and a stronger marriage too. I see a lot of people who produce content on masculinity telling guys what the natural virtues are, but man can't even perfectly keep the natural law without God. So what we run on ultimately is the service to God, and we need that grace to be able to actually follow this blueprint properly. And if you pull that out, then everything goes with it.
It's a good point. Yeah, you end up in, at present, it seems like you end up in either some version of nationalism being the new surrogate god or idol, or some version of like gang tribalism being the surrogate for God. That ends up being the North Star by which the masculinity gets organized around.
Yeah, there has
Which
to
isn't
be
to
one.
say, which isn't to say that like familial or brotherly bonds aren't valuable. They are, but they still need to be subordinated to the highest good.
Yeah, I agree. We've got a few other points to get through, Tim, if you still got some time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. The idea that a young woman's career can actually pose a danger to her.
Yeah, it poses a real danger to her, a really obvious moral, spiritual, and practical one. I mean, take it in the order of practical. People care about practicality first. You're developing habits that are perfectly contrary to what is good for a woman, right? To be private. I mean, just so people understand what we're working with, the nature of male, female are binary, trannies. Men are expressive by nature, women are receptive. Men are active, women are passive. Men are penetrative, women are penetrated. Men are supposed to be loud, women are supposed to be quiet. So men are supposed to be public, women are supposed to be private. So everything about going and getting a job is about putting yourself out there. Think about putting your CV, your resume out there, getting in public, making yourself large. That's what you're doing when you're pounding the pavement to get a job. That's what a woman's doing. Also, a woman is literally subordinating herself to a boss, and it's usually, whatever the feminists complain about, it's usually a male boss that is surrogating the submissive role that she's supposed to offer to her husband. Literally, I mean, think of the movie standard, like, oh, I can't make dinner tonight, honey. My boss asked me to have dinner with him on his boat. I mean, you are literally being cucked if your wife works by your wife's boss, who's usually a male. Every habit that's inculcated by women in the workplace moves contrary to female nature. It's not passive, it's active. It's not receptive, it's expressive. It's not private, it's public. And women have been really, really, really badly objectified in the workplace in a way they never were before they got into the workplace.
Yeah, that's the irony. Chesterton's point that feminism is the weird idea that a woman is a
Women are
servant.
free.
Yeah.
They serve the employers but slaves, but when they help their husbands. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly it. So they end up submissive, but just to the wrong person in the wrong place. But you still don't escape that role.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really well put. Now, I think a big take-home point for guys listening is that you stress that we need frugality to be able to run a one-income household. We don't want to fall into that two-income trap because all the evils you just described will come with it. But this often means sacrificing some things that many people find it painful to. And you make the point that worldly possessions are a mere means to the end of vocational family. You have to put them into their proper place.
Yeah, I mean, I guess people are surprised that they don't need like 9 television sets. And so you have to tell them, like, yeah, like if folks tell me, oh, well, now, Tim, you're a social media influencer, patron, and that stuff. Now you can afford to be a one income household. But how was it before? I was a school teacher on a single income. It was not that hard. We lived well, even when I was a school teacher, even in the most expensive state in America, in California, Southern California. We had plenty of money. Like, generally, it's true, you linearly build up wealth, but that's what the great thing. You get married young, you don't need much wealth, you have no kids, and you're willing to take on the adventuresome nature of life with just you and your wife. You don't need, you need health insurance that much less by the numbers when you're young. You need the trappings of wealth that much less. You need a little more. 5 years in America, have 3 or 4 kids, 15, 20, then you get older and you get a little more dependent on it. But folks are being told by their parents, you need 2 incomes and you need $1 million in the bank before you can get married. It's all just the population control, one worlders, new world order types that are pushing this lie of how much. And it also just makes men more low T, more fat, flabby, and weak and emasculated. They're more cucked to the more they think they need wealth. I mean, Mike was an Army Ranger. This should be especially pathetic to him, that the kinds of challenges he was forced to go through in his life. You do not need much but a roof. And it doesn't have to be a fancy roof, particularly for young people. It's fine to get a bigger house when you get more kids if you can afford it, but you don't need it. You need a roof and you need some food. You don't need and it makes it nice if you have one TV for the home. Guess what? Like, you don't even need 2 cars in every garage. If you homeschool, you need 1 car. If you have a single household income and you homeschool, you don't even need 2 cars. The mom doesn't even have to be going out during the day. That it's consonant with these principles. You can go out and take a family drive, go to the grocery store later. It's better for husband and wife to be doing more stuff. Me and Steph always do the shopping together. I remember talking about this with Elliot. There's not need for all the things you assume there's need for. So frugality is the key, is the rejoinder to this false proposition people spit at you like, oh, maybe 100 years ago you could be a single income, but not now. It's like, sorry, bro. I was a school teacher and we had a nice life even then. And we did not just have a roof. We had multiple TVs, just not 9.
Yep, I've done the same thing in the UK, in London and other expensive areas as a school teacher since age 21, 22, and even working as a manual laborer on a building site when I couldn't get a teaching job for a period too. Still, it can be done, single income, and people need to grasp this concept that you can actually live a more masculine life with less money sometimes. I mean, money's a good thing, it's for supporting your family, but you can take it to the point where you've put it in a position where it shouldn't be and it harms the rest of your life.
Yeah, totally. Even when you get a little more of it, you're like, I feel flabbier for having it. I become that much more dependent on things I like Fight Club says, right? The things you own end up owning you. So you actually start getting nostalgic for the time of youth when you had less. When Steph and I went to Italy, to Rome to live when I was studying for graduate degrees at a pontifical school, we had almost no money. We were making it go, but it was so fun and such an adventure. And we loved every minute of it. And we didn't even have a working TV in our apartment. We had a little DVD player this big, and we brought all of our DVDs in a Case Logic sleeve, and we would watch those at night. We'd watch a movie at night when we fell asleep, but it was on the bed between us. It was this big, smaller than a laptop.
Sounds like good memories. I've had similar experiences, and including times with just no telly as well, not paying TV license and just getting rid of it entirely. And then that was really good for the kids as well, because they have to be more imaginative with their play and all the rest of it. Wrapping up then, most important message from the book: destroy feminism by eradicating fornication among singles to the greatest possible extent. That's the message for men. That's what we need to get guys taking on board. To the extent that they comply with fornication, it's complying with feminism.
Absolutely. I couldn't say it better myself. It's not some cope or some stretch. Just if you fornicate with a young woman, you are giving her power over you. So the Andrew Tate-isms of fornicate often, defeat feminism are insanely contraposed. They're insanely contraposed. If you have sex with a young woman, she has psychological power over you. Let's say she's a crazy young feminist woman, which is likely. She'll have psychological power over you. She'll have logistical power over you. If you impregnate her, she will have the ability, and a lot of these sleaze bags don't even care, to kill your son or daughter, and you don't even have a say. You are empowering a young woman by being a sleazeball and fornicating with her. You're re-empowering men. Women are obsessed with men, guys. You don't buy the hype. Don't believe the hype. Don't have sex with them. It'll make them want men even more, and just court them in a restrained way. It's nothing more manly, and there's nothing that is more retentive by its nature of your position as the head, and it makes women, it puts women back in their place, which is what these red pill guys claim to want. They're not effectuating that by doing. They're throwing two contraries together. They're both things they want. They want to have sex, and they want to put women in their place. Well, you have to pick between those. Pick the right one. Have sex when you're married.
Yeah, and they want to have to brand themselves as anti-establishment and anti large nanny state, and
right,
you can't have that either.
Right, libido dominandi.
Mm-hmm. And this isn't something that we're suggesting as like a hypothesis of maybe it will work, maybe it won't. Looking at human history and considering the reality of human nature, the family being what it is, sex being what it is ordered to, this is how we bring strong societies into reality. And you've got a kind of negative proof, if you like, because look at what promiscuity brings about. This was attacked because it's the most important thing. This is why promiscuity was weaponized. So they understand it. You need to as well in order to combat it.
Amen. Yeah, this is 100% success rate. If young men listening, if you can retain your purity, this is 100% success rate. If you haven't retained your purity now, up to now, begin. It will begin to be 100% success rate.
And Mike and I have mentioned this before as well, that this comes with the whole package as well. So if you're thinking, but what if I don't have authority over my wife? Well, if you're watching porn, if you're coming home after work and you're just drinking, watching sports, you're not doing your duties, why are you expecting to have any authority? You are failing in your primary duties. But if you're serving God, if you're asking for grace, you go and get into sacraments, then you've got a power in your corner that is infinite and can make the whole universe tremble. And if you've got that with you, then what are you afraid of?
Yeah.
Well said.
All right, Tim, we really appreciate you coming in for the last session on your book. I think everyone's enjoyed it. Really informative and enlightening. Thank you.
Thanks for covering the book, guys. I appreciate it. God bless all of your audience, and well, you guys are my bros, so I'll see you at the latest on Friday when we do our weekly CMAS. People come to Timothy Gordon on YouTube, go to Michael's Robillard's channel on YouTube, go to Will Nolan Knows on YouTube, because we do a weekly show that rotates between these three channels, and also Elliot Holst, the fourth CMAS bro.
That's it. Tim's book, here it is, Case for Patriarchy, and his wife, Steph, as well, Ask Your Husband, covers similar material from the feminine angle. And if anything, Tim, I'm sorry to say, is probably even harder hitting.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And I'm not just saying it has, what are some of the chapters that really piss feminists off? Steph's, yeah, one of them is do what he likes, wear what he likes. That's Steph giving wives that advice. That's the chapter title. So, it's probably more controversial than mine. I think that's a fair statement.
Highly recommended. Definitely read both as a pair. All right, guys, thanks so much. And I will see you on Friday for the CMAS. Take care.
Sounds good. Later, guys.